Hello everyone, this is the first video in the chapter covering the urinary system. And this is chapter 24 in the textbook. So let's start looking at some main functions of the urinary system. And they are shown on the first slide here. And so one of the main functions of the urinary system is to maintain homeostasis of body fluids. And the main way that the urinary system does that is by filtering blood. So blood is circulated to the body in general, and the consistency, the volume, and the materials contained in blood are therefore going to determine the volume and materials found in the body fluids in general. Okay, so the urinary system is actually regulating blood, but since that's communicating with body fluids in general, that has that effect as well. So homeostasis is one of the key functions. Second main function is excretion of waste, and this is also by filtering blood. And so filtration of blood and removal of excess materials, unneeded materials, or sometimes harmful materials, and then elimination from the body is the second main function. Now, the main organ that's carrying out these functions is the kidney. And so let's look specifically at the kidney in terms of the main functions that it carries out. So first of all, the kidney is an organ which filters the blood. And by doing so, it's able to eliminate waste, unneeded materials, toxins, and some drugs from the body. Okay, blood filtration and elimination. Another thing that the kidney does by filtering blood is maintaining homeostasis. And some examples are the kidney is able to, by filtering blood, regulate blood volume, and therefore body fluid volume. Kidney also regulates blood electrolyte concentrations. For example, potassium, sodium, calcium. Another main thing that the kidneys do is by regulating acid and base balance. So it's involved in regulating the pH of the blood. Third main function of the kidneys is production of renin. Renin, if you recall from the blood vessel chapter, is an enzyme that's involved in the production of angiotensin II. And angiotensin II is a hormone that helps to decrease blood pressure. Fourth function is kidneys produce the hormone erythropoietin. So they produce this directly. And for that reason, the kidneys are partially have an endocrine function. Recall that EPO is the hormone that stimulates red blood cell production in the bone marrow. And final function for the kidneys, on our list anyway, is production of vitamin D. And vitamin D is a hormone. It's sort of misnamed. It's a hormone that's involved in regulating blood calcium levels. So those are some of the main functions of the urinary system in general, and specifically the kidney. So let's look at the anatomy of the urinary system next. So this slide shows the main organs that are involved, and on the right is a cadaver dissected and showing the dorsal part of the abdominal cavity. And on the left is a basically diagrammatic version of that. Here are the kidneys. You have two kidneys, and they're up against the dorsal body wall, and in fact have a retroperitoneal location. The right kidney is carried a little bit lower than the left kidney, and that's because this is the position of the liver. The liver is crowding out the right kidney somewhat, and so it's pushed downward. Each kidney has an adrenal gland on the superior surface of the organ. The other urinary system structures are, in addition to the kidneys, there's a tube connecting the kidney, each kidney, to the bladder. So the tubes are called ureters. The ureters are going to conduct urine from the kidneys to be stored in the bladder. You have two kidneys, you have two ureters, you have one bladder. So the bladder is storing urine. And the other structure, not really visible on the cadaver, is the urethra. The urethra is the tube that allows urine to pass from the bladder to the outside. So those are the main organs involved. And this is just a posterior view of those organs. The kidneys are, so they're sort of in the upper lumbar region, and they are somewhat protected by the floating ribs. And this shows the ureters. They connect to the medial surface. There's an indentation on the medial surface of the kidney called the hilum. They connect there, and they convey urine down along the lateral side of the vertebral column. They connect to the bladder on the superior posterior surface. Here's the bladder, and here is the urethra. Okay, let's talk about general function of the organs that, not the kidneys, I guess, I'll put it that way, in the urinary system. So the ureters are the channels or the tubes that conduct urine from the kidneys to the bladder. That's their main function. The urinary bladder is a temporary storage site for urine. And the urethra is the channel that allows urine to pass from the bladder to the outside. All right, some general properties of the kidneys. And for most of this chapter, I'm going to be focusing on kidneys. There's a pretty elaborate anatomy to them, and they are carrying out most of the homeostatic and functions in the urinary system. So some general properties of the kidneys, and you could see this from the previous slide. So they are bean-shaped organs. In fact, kidney beans resemble kidneys. And they have a retroperitoneal location. So they're embedded in the dorsal body wall, and they are posterior to the parietal peritoneum. They're about the size of a large bar of soap, a little bit smaller than most people think. So in the upper lumbar region, protected by the ribs, and each has an adrenal gland attached. So I mentioned this, the right kidney is lower than the left. And a little bit about the kidneys and surrounding structures. So each kidney is surrounded by a fibrous membrane, or two fibrous membranes actually. So the inner one is the capsule, and that's what surrounds the structure of the kidney, internal structure. The outer membrane is called the fibrous fascia, and that kind of anchors it in place and helps to protect it as well. Surrounding kidneys are a bunch of fatty masses called a paranephric fat, and that's basically cushioning the kidney against jolt. And this slide is illustrating some of those structures. So this is a transverse section through the abdominal cavity, and anterior here, posterior here. Here's the vertebral column, and here are some of the abdominal organs: liver, stomach, intestines, pancreas, and here are the kidneys. So retroperitoneal location. If you look at the parietal peritoneum, it's here, and the kidneys are lying posterior to that, retroperitoneal. The red arrows are also pointing out the positions of the other structures from the previous slide. So here's the kidney itself, and all of this tissue is paranephric fat cushioning it. Here is the renal fascia, so that's the fibrous membrane that's anchoring the kidney in place. That runs through the paranephric fat layer. And the fibrous capsule is the tough fibrous layer surrounding, encompassing the internal structure of the kidney. All right, let's talk about the internal anatomy of the kidney, and this is at the macroscopic level. If you section a kidney, and this would be a frontal section, you can see the basic subdivisions internally. And there are three subdivisions, and these are the renal cortex. Cortex is the outermost segment of it, and that appears kind of lightish in color. Overall, the kidney has a sort of a reddish appearance to it, but the cortex is kind of a light red. Going internally, deeper into the kidney is called the medulla. Medulla means middle. So this is a darker reddish color. And this is sectored off into regions called the renal pyramids. And then finally, the innermost and the medial part of the kidney is called the renal sinus. And the renal sinus is where urine, when produced, first collects. And this is going to connect to the ureter as urine is flowing out of the kidney. Okay, so this slide is just listing some terms. These are going to be on the next couple of slides showing the internal anatomy. And I would expect you to know these. And that's a hint. You will see probably a section of a kidney and asked to label or identify different parts that are indicated. So you should definitely know these structures. Okay. All right, so here's a frontal section through a kidney. And this is the right kidney. This would be the medial surface. This would be the lateral surface. This is an actual dissected human kidney. And this is a, a diagrammatic version of that. All right, so here's the cortex. Let me point it out on the diagrammatic version first. So that runs around the outside all the way from the medial surface here, all the way around to the lateral surface. That's the cortex. So that's a little bit lighter red in color. That's lying just beneath the capsule is the word I was looking for. I lost that word. So this is the capsule running around it, and the cortex is lying just below that. Okay? Here's the medulla, darker red in color, and these are the renal pyramids, the different sectors that are making up the renal medulla. Between the pyramids are called the renal columns. So those are kind of extensions of the cortex, similar to the cortex, lighter in color. The renal pyramids come to a point. They're wide at the cortex side, but they're pointed, and where they're coming close in contact to the sinus. And those are called the renal papilla. Okay, so the pyramids come to a point. That's the renal papilla. Here's the renal sinus, cortex, medulla, sinus. The sinus is basically channels of different diameter. There are small, medium, and large channels. And the smallest channels are connecting directly to the renal papilla of the pyramids. And these channels are called the minor calyx for the small ones, major calyx for the medium ones, and the renal pelvis is the largest kind of main collecting area. So these are all collecting urine that's going to flow out from the pyramids through the papilla, first into the small channels, minor calyx, then into the larger channels, major calyx, then into this main collecting chamber, the pelvis. And then urine is going to exit into the ureter. Okay? So those are the main structures in terms of the internal anatomy of the kidney. Now, the kidneys have a very rich blood supply, right? One of the main functions is filtration of blood. So they get a very good supply of blood. And each kidney has a renal artery, and that's a branch off of the descending aorta. And that's going to receive, both kidneys are receiving about 1/4 of the total cardiac output. Okay, so that's just an indicator of how much. The kidneys each kidney is drained by a renal vein, and so that renal vein then is going to connect into the inferior vena cava. Right, so this diagram is indicating the renal artery supplying blood, and this is going to divide continuously, branching off into different parts of the kidney, and it's going to extend eventually through the medulla into the cortex. Okay, and then after blood, the cortex is the site of filtration. There's structures called nephrons. That's what's shown on this slide. We're not going to go into those quite yet, but blood is going to be delivered to the nephrons, and that's where filtration occurs. And then blood is going to return back through the medulla to the renal vein and exit from the kidney. So entry, filtration, and then exit. All right, here are the general pathway in terms of the branches from the renal artery. And I don't expect you to know these vessels that are not labeled with a red arrow. But the ones that have a red arrow, you should definitely know. So from the renal artery, there's a segmental artery, and then there are interlobar arteries. The interlobar arteries are passing between the pyramids. And then they're extending out to these arcuate arteries surrounding kind of at the border between the cortex and the medulla. And they are extending out into the cortex. So this is, when we get to the red ones here, these are the ones we're going to talk about when we talk about a nephron and the actual process of blood filtration. Afferent arteriole leads to a glomerulus, and this is the actual site of filtration. An efferent arteriole. And then this is going to leave the nephron by one of two types of vessels. These are venules, basically, or sorry, capillaries. And there are two different types of nephrons involved here, so that's why there are two sets. And then there is going to exit by an interlobar vein, an arcuate vein, another interlobar vein, and then eventually to a renal vein exiting from the kidney. All right, so that's kind of an overview of the function of the urinary system, functions of kidneys, the general body position, gross anatomy, and the gross internal anatomy of the kidneys, and the main types of circulation. And in the next video, we're going to start talking about the microscopic anatomy of the kidneys, and we're going to focus in on the nephrons. What is the anatomy of those, and how do they function as blood filtration units? See ya.